She had it all: power, money, status. But a simple taxi ride changed everything. What started as an ordinary day became the greatest lesson of her life. Who was that mysterious driver, and how would he make her question everything she had always believed? Discover the truth in this surprising story. The click of Emily's stilettos echoed across the marble floor of the elegant office building in the heart of New York City. Her determined steps, along with the impeccably fitted Chanel suit hugging her slender frame, revealed the image she worked so hard to cultivate, that of a successful, powerful, and untouchable woman. At 35, she had achieved the position of executive director at one of the country's largest investment firms, and she made sure everyone knew it. On that particularly busy September morning, the building's air conditioning seemed unable to cope with the heat in the city. Emily wiped her forehead, worried that a drop of sweat might smudge her perfectly applied makeup. Her Mercedes, her pride and symbol of status, had experienced an electrical problem early on, forcing her to do something she considered absolutely beneath her position: take a taxi. "This is ridiculous," she muttered to herself, checking her designer watch once again. The meeting with the Middle Eastern investors was scheduled for 7 p.m., and she needed to resolve a series of issues before then. Her secretary had already called 3 times to confirm the final details of the dinner that would take place at the city's most exclusive restaurant. When the taxi finally pulled up, Emily barely waited for it to come to a complete stop before opening the door. The driver, a middle-aged man with distinctive features and a well-trimmed beard, greeted her with a serene smile that she didn't even notice. "Fifth Avenue, 3477, and please be quick. I don't have time to waste," she snapped, already with her phone in hand, responding to dozens of important emails. The driver nodded calmly in the rearview mirror. There was something in his dark, deep eyes that conveyed a silent wisdom, but Emily was too busy with her own concerns to notice anything beyond her own image reflected in the mirror. "No, Christina, I can't accept this kind of incompetence." Her voice cut through the silence of the taxi as she spoke on the phone. "I don't care if the supplier was late. You should have anticipated this. Find a solution by the end of the day, or look for another job." The driver maintained his impassive expression, navigating through the chaotic traffic with a calmness that was beginning to irritate Emily. She huffed impatiently when he stopped at a red light. "Why are you stopping? You could have gone through on yellow." "I'm going to be late," she complained, rolling her eyes. "Safety is more important than a few seconds, ma'am," he responded serenely, with a soft accent that Emily couldn't quite place. "Oh, spare me. Drivers always have an excuse. That's why you never get out of this mediocre life: lack of ambition, of drive." The man just smiled, an enigmatic smile that for a brief moment made Emily feel uncomfortable, as if he knew something she didn't. But she quickly turned her attention back to her phone, completely ignoring his presence. During the ride, Emily made sure to make her importance clear, speaking loudly about the millions her company moved, about dinners with important businessmen, and about how people like her shouldn't be subjected to public transportation. When they finally reached their destination, she practically threw some bills onto the front seat without even checking the exact fare. "Keep the change," she said, disdainfully, as if she were doing him an immense favor. What Emily didn't know was that this simple taxi ride was about to change her life forever. In a few hours, she would discover that appearances can be deceiving, and that her certainties about success and value were about to be completely shaken. As she rode up in the mirrored elevator of the building, fixing her hair and touching up her lipstick, Emily had no idea that the universe had prepared a lesson that no MBA or leadership course could teach. The approaching night held a surprise that would make her question everything she had always considered important. The sun was beginning to set on the New York horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, creating a spectacle that Emily in her constant rush didn't even notice. But sometimes it takes something extraordinary to happen, to make us stop and really see the world around us. And that night would be extraordinary in ways she could never have imagined. Emily swept through the main lobby of the office like a hurricane, leaving a trail of tension wherever she passed. Employees discreetly shrank at their desks, avoiding drawing her attention. The meeting with the mysterious Middle Eastern investor would be the next day, and she was determined that everything would go absolutely perfectly. "Patricia," she called her assistant as soon as she entered her office, "I want all the financial reports from the last 3 quarters reviewed and on my desk in an hour. And where's the dossier on Sheikh Abdullah that I asked for?" The young assistant, always efficient despite her boss's difficult temperament, was already prepared. "Here it is, Emily, but I confess it was difficult to find information about him. Sheikh Abdullah al-Rahman is extremely private. There are practically no photos of him on the internet, and information about his businesses is very well guarded." Emily quickly flipped through the prepared material. Indeed, there was very little concrete information about the man who could change the course of her career. Sheikh Abdullah was known to be one of the most influential investors in the Middle East, with stakes in technology companies, renewable energy, and real estate around the world. But unlike other billionaires, he kept himself out of the spotlight. "How? Do they expect me to prepare adequately if I barely know who I'm negotiating with?" she complained, throwing the folder on the desk. "At least did you manage to confirm the dinner at Le Bernardin?" "Yes, I reserved the private room with a view of the city as you requested. The chef has prepared a special menu taking into account all the dietary restrictions of Arab culture. The cellar has set aside the best non-alcoholic wines and..." "Non-alcoholic wines? Does that even exist?" Emily interrupted with disdain. "What a waste of time, but I suppose we need to respect these cultural peculiarities," she added, rolling her eyes. The rest of the afternoon was dedicated to endless meetings with the marketing team, designers, and financial analysts. Emily demanded perfection in every detail of the presentation they would make to the sheikh. The company's expansion project to the Middle East was her big bet, and she would not admit any failures. "These colors are too aggressive," she criticized during the final review of the presentation. "I want something more sophisticated that conveys confidence without seeming like we're trying too hard. And review all the numbers one more time. If I find even one error tomorrow, you can start updating your resumes." It was past 9 o'clock at night when Emily finally left the office. New York was still pulsing, illuminated by car headlights and the windows of buildings that never slept. Her personal driver was still at the garage with her Mercedes, forcing her again to call a taxi. "Great, another day having to mix with the common folk," she grumbled while waiting on the sidewalk. The taxi that stopped was different from the morning one, simpler, with a young driver who tried to make conversation. Emily ignored him completely, focused on her tablet, reviewing the project numbers once again. In her penthouse apartment in Tribeca, Emily continued working. The panoramic view of the city that had so enchanted her when she bought the property was barely noticed now, serving only as a backdrop for her concerns about the next day. She poured herself a glass of wine while organizing her wardrobe. Each piece of clothing had a story of conquest. The Armani suit she wore when she was promoted to director, the Versace dress from the cover of Forbes magazine, the Louboutin shoes from her first big international negotiation. Carefully chosen and displayed symbols of success. After almost an hour, she decided on a classic black Chanel ensemble, elegant without being ostentatious. "I need to impress without seeming like I'm trying to impress," she muttered to herself, adjusting the impeccable fabric on the hanger. Before going to bed, Emily made her last email check. Among the dozens of messages, one in particular caught her attention. It was from Sheikh Abdullah's office, confirming his presence at the dinner, but with an intriguing detail. He would arrive earlier in the city and would like to see a bit of New York before the formal engagement. Typical, Emily thought with contempt. These Arabs love to play tourist with other people's money. Tomorrow he'll want me to be his tour guide around the city. Little did she know that Sheikh Abdullah was already more familiar with New York than she imagined, and that his true interest in the city, and particularly in that meeting, went far beyond simple tourism or business. Emily set 3 alarms for the next morning, although she knew she wouldn't sleep well. She had worked too hard to get where she was, and she wouldn't allow anything to threaten her hard-won position. As she fell asleep, her mind was still buzzing with spreadsheets, presentations, and negotiation strategies. What she didn't know was that the universe had other plans. Sometimes you need to lose control to really find the right path, and the next day held a lesson that no business school could teach. Morning dawned grey in New York, with a fine drizzle typical of the city. Emily woke up before the first alarm even went off, her mind already in full activity. As she prepared, she mentally repeated every detail of the presentation she would make to Sheikh Abdullah. "Today's the day," she murmured to her reflection in the mirror as she applied her favorite red lipstick. The Chanel ensemble chosen the night before was impeccable, as was every strand of her dark brown hair, meticulously arranged in an elegant bun. Her phone rang. It was Raphael, the garage manager, with news about her Mercedes. "I'm sorry, Miss Emily, but we discovered a more serious problem in the electrical system. We'll need at least 2 more days to resolve it." Emily felt her face heat up with anger. "Incompetence," she railed. "You have no idea of the inconvenience you're causing me. I demand a replacement car of equal caliber." "Unfortunately, ma'am, all our replacement vehicles are occupied due to an international event in the city." "Great, just great," she cut him off, hanging up the phone forcefully. Another day depending on taxis. It was as if the universe was conspiring against her on the most important day of her career. She went down to the lobby of her luxury building and asked the doorman to call a taxi. While waiting, she compulsively checked her phone, responding to emails and checking the latest international market quotes. The taxi that stopped was different from the previous ones, newer, cleaner. Emily looked up for a moment and had a strange sensation when she saw the driver. There was something familiar about him, but she was too busy to try to remember where she might have seen him before. "Good morning, ma'am," the man greeted with a serene smile and a slight accent. "Where are we headed?" "Fifth Avenue, 3477, she responded dryly, already immersed in her tablet. "And be quick, please, I have important meetings." The driver nodded calmly and began to drive. There was a smoothness to his movements that contrasted with Emily's agitation. From time to time, he observed her in the rearview mirror with an enigmatic look. "You seem tense today," he commented at one point, his calm voice cutting through the silence of the car. Emily looked up, irritated by the intrusion. "Excuse me, but I don't remember asking for a therapy session. Just drive, okay?" The man smiled again, that same mysterious smile that for some reason bothered her. "Sometimes, ma'am, life's greatest lessons come from the most unexpected sources." "Oh, please spare me the cheap philosophy," she cut him off, turning her attention back to the tablet, but something in his voice, in the way he spoke, continued to disturb her in a way she couldn't explain. The rest of the journey passed in silence. When they reached their destination, Emily threw some bills onto the front seat, without even looking at the amount, as she always did. But before she could get out of the car, the driver said something that made her freeze for a moment. "Have an excellent day, Miss Emily, and good luck with Sheikh Abdullah." She turned abruptly, but the man was already busy with his next passenger. How did he know her name? And about the meeting with the sheikh? But her mind quickly dismissed these questions. She had probably mentioned something during a phone call. The day at the office was a succession of meetings and final reviews. Emily was more demanding than usual, even making an assistant cry after a particularly harsh criticism about the organization of documents for the meeting. "Frankly, do you want to make me look foolish?" she vociferated during the last meeting with the team. "This is the biggest investor we've ever received, and you come to me with mediocre presentations. Redo everything, and don't leave here until it's perfect." The hours dragged on with excruciating slowness. Emily alternated between moments of absolute confidence and poorly disguised anxiety. At 5 in the afternoon, she began to prepare for dinner. She touched up her makeup, adjusted her suit, and rehearsed her presentation speech once again. "Emily," Patricia called from the door. "An email just arrived from the Sheikh's office. He apologizes, but he'll be arriving a little late to dinner. He suggests that you go ahead to welcome the other guests." "Late? How unprofessional," Emily complained, although secretly relieved to have a few more minutes to prepare. "All right, call a taxi for me. My car is still at the garage." As she descended in the elevator, Emily mentally rehearsed different approaches to impress the sheikh. She was sure that her presentation would be impeccable, that this would be the moment that would consolidate her position in the world of international business. The taxi waiting for her at the building's door was elegant, an executive model. Emily got in without paying much attention to the driver, busy making last-minute checks on her phone. But when he spoke, his voice made her freeze. "Good evening, Miss Emily. To Le Bernardin restaurant, correct?" It was the same driver from the morning, and again, that enigmatic smile in the rear-view mirror. This time, Emily couldn't ignore the unsettling feeling that invaded her. How was he here again? How did he know her destination? But before she could formulate any questions, her phone rang. It was Patricia, informing her that the first guests were already arriving at the restaurant. Emily took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus on what really mattered, the meeting that was about to happen. What she didn't know was that her life was about to change completely. Sometimes destiny has a peculiar sense of humor, and that night was just beginning. Le Bernardin restaurant shone in the New York night, its soft lights reflecting on the mirrored windows of neighboring buildings. Emily got out of the taxi with the same haughty posture as always, but something was bothering her. The mysterious driver had disappeared into traffic before she could question him about his intriguing coincidences. The maitre d' greeted her with the deference reserved for the most important clients. "Good evening, Miss Emily. Your private room is prepared as requested. The first guests have already arrived." The private salon had a privileged view of the city. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, New York stretched out like a carpet of lights, creating an impressive backdrop for the meeting. Emily greeted the executives who were already present, representatives of investment funds, directors of international banks, and influential business people. Sheikh Abdullah confirmed that he will arrive in approximately 20 minutes, informed Patricia, who was already on site supervising the final details. All other guests have confirmed their presence. Emily circulated through the environment with the ease of someone accustomed to being in command. Her crystalline laugh echoed as she conversed with those present, but internally, her mind was focused on the arrival of the main guest. "Emily," called Charles, one of the partner bank's directors. "Have you met Sheikh Abdullah in person yet? They say he's quite peculiar in his business approaches." "I haven't had that pleasure yet," she responded with a rehearsed smile. "But I'm sure that after tonight, we'll have a very productive partnership." The minutes passed slowly. Emily discreetly checked her reflection in the window panes, making sure that every detail of her appearance was perfect. The waiter circulated, offering non-alcoholic drinks, respecting the cultural restrictions of the main guest. "Ma'am," Patricia approached with a tense expression, "the sheikh has just arrived at the restaurant." A buzz of expectation ran through the environment. Emily positioned herself strategically near the entrance, mentally rehearsing her welcome speech once again. The doors of the room opened, and time seemed to freeze. There, entering with elegant steps and an impeccably cut suit, was he, the taxi driver who had transported her throughout the day. But now there was nothing simple about his appearance. His bearing was majestic. His presence commanded immediate attention. Emily felt the blood drain from her face. Her legs went weak, and for a moment she thought she might faint. Sheikh Abdullah al-Rahman, the man she had treated with such disdain, whom she had repeatedly belittled, was smiling at her with that same serene smile that had so disturbed her. "Good evening, Miss Emily," he said, his voice now carrying an authority that had been carefully disguised before. "I hope I haven't caused too much trouble with my unconventional method of getting to know your business." The silence in the room was deafening. The other guests observed the scene with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. Emily opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Her hands trembled slightly, and she could feel beads of cold sweat forming on her forehead. I don't understand," she finally managed to stammer. Sheikh Abdullah approached, still maintaining that enigmatic smile. "You know, Miss Emily, in my culture, we believe that a person's true character is revealed, not when they are in front of those they consider important, but in how they treat those they judge to be—" What was the word you used? "Ah, yes. Mediocre." Each word was like a needle piercing the bubble of superiority that Emily had built around herself. Memories of the past few days flashed through her mind like painful snapshots, her acidic comments, her arrogance, her deprecating treatment. "But don't worry," the sheikh continued, now addressing all those present. "I'm not here to humiliate anyone. On the contrary, sometimes the universe presents us with lessons in unexpected ways, and I believe this is an opportunity for all of us to reflect on values that go beyond numbers on a spreadsheet." Emily felt the gazes of everyone present upon her. Years of building a reputation of power and superiority seemed to melt like snow in the sun in the face of this surreal situation. Her throat was dry and she could hear her own heart beating erratically. "Sheikh Abdullah, I apologize," she finally managed to say, her voice almost a whisper. "It's not to me that you owe apologies, Ms. Emily," he replied softly, "but perhaps to all those who have crossed your path and were judged solely by their appearance, social position, or the work they do." The sheikh then turned to the other guests, his presence filling the room. "Now, I believe we have business to discuss. After all, I didn't come to New York just to give lessons in humility." The waiters began to serve dinner, and gradually, the tension in the atmosphere dissipated. But for Emily, nothing would be the same again. As she sat at the table trying to maintain her composure, she knew that this night would mark a before and after in her life. Sheikh Abdullah occasionally gave her understanding looks, as if he perfectly understood the whirlwind of emotions she was experiencing. And for the first time in many years, Emily allowed herself to question everything she had always considered important in her life. Dinner proceeded with an almost surreal formality. Emily observed, as if in a dream, Sheikh Abdullah conducting the meeting with a perfect blend of authority and gentleness. Each of his gestures, each carefully chosen word, demonstrated a wisdom that went far beyond the numbers and contracts she had so meticulously prepared. "The true wealth of a business," he was saying, as the main courses were being served, "is not just in its market value, but in the impact it has on people's lives. From the humblest employee to the CEO, all are part of a great web of human relationships." Emily picked at her food without really tasting it. Her mind was elsewhere, reliving every moment of the past few days, every harsh word, every look of contempt she had directed at the man who now commanded the attention of everyone present. How could she have been so blind? "Ms. Emily," the sheikh's voice brought her back to reality. "Your presentation on the company's expansion to the Middle East, please." She stood up mechanically, her legs still shaky. The laptop was ready, the presentation prepared. But when she opened her mouth to begin, the words seemed empty, devoid of the meaning they seemed to have before. Her voice faltered. For the first time in her career, Emily found herself completely unprepared. It wasn't the numbers that were missing, nor the perfectly elaborated graphs. It was something deeper, a certainty that had been broken. Sheikh Abdullah smiled gently. "Perhaps," he said, "we can approach this presentation in a different way. Tell us, Emily, about the people behind these numbers. Who are the employees who made these results possible?" The question caught her off guard. In all her years of career, Emily had never really thought about that. She knew every financial indicator, every goal achieved, but the faces behind those numbers were a blur in her memory. "Well," she began hesitantly, "we have a team of—" She stopped. How many people actually worked on her team? What was the name of that assistant she had made cry earlier? Why had she never cared to know? "Go on," encouraged the sheikh. "Sometimes what seems like a weakness can be the beginning of a great strength." Emily took a deep breath. "Actually, Sheikh Abdullah, I realize now that I can't give this presentation. Not the way it should be done. I've spent so much time focused on numbers and status that I forgot the most important thing. The people." A murmur ran through the room. Executives exchanged surprised glances. Emily Wilson, the Iron Lady of the financial market, admitting a weakness? "Excellent," said the sheikh, his smile widening. "Now we're starting to speak the same language." The rest of the dinner went differently than planned. Instead of a formal presentation, a genuine discussion developed about business purpose, social responsibility, and human development. The Sheikh shared stories of his own journey, of how he had learned to balance financial success with human values. "You know, Emily," he said at a more private moment, "I chose to present myself as a taxi driver not to test you, but to offer an opportunity for growth. Sometimes we need to strip ourselves of our certainties to find deeper truths." As the guests began to say goodbye, Emily remained in a state of deep reflection. Her world, so carefully built on foundations of appearances and power, was transforming before her eyes. "Sheikh Abdullah," she called as he was about to leave. "Why me? Why dedicate so much time to giving me this lesson?" He stopped and looked at her with the same serenity that had so disturbed her in the taxi. "Because I saw in you something beyond arrogance and materialism. I saw someone with the potential to make a difference, someone who had just lost their way. And the business, the investment." "Ah, yes," he smiled. "My interest in investing in your company remains, but now perhaps we can build something that goes beyond profit, something that really makes a difference in people's lives." When Emily finally left the restaurant, the night was already late. She declined Jessica's offer to call a taxi. She needed to walk, think, breathe. New York, always so noisy and busy, seemed different now. Or was it her who was seeing the city with different eyes? She passed a group of taxi drivers chatting at a stand, and for the first time she really saw them as people. Fathers, mothers, children, each with their own story, their own dreams and struggles. How could she have been so indifferent to this for so long? In her luxurious apartment, Emily found herself unable to sleep. She walked to the balcony and observed the city that never slept. The lights of the cars below formed rivers of movement, and in each lit window there was a life, a story. Her phone rang, a message from Jessica, informing her that her Mercedes was ready to be picked up from the shop. Emily looked at the message and for the first time felt that maybe, just maybe, she didn't need that car so much after all. Perhaps there were other ways to measure success, other ways to leave her mark on the world. The next morning dawned, different for Emily. For the first time in years, she didn't immediately check her messages upon waking. Instead, she spent a few minutes on her apartment balcony, watching the sunrise over New York, allowing herself to simply exist without the constant pressure of being in control. Her reflection in the mirror looked the same, perfectly arranged, hair, flawless makeup, designer clothes. But something had changed in her eyes. The cold glint of ambition had been replaced by something softer, more human. "Good morning, Mr. Johnson," she greeted the doorman as she left the building. It was the first time she had used his name, she realized with a pang of shame. How many times had she passed by him as if he were just part of the decor? Her Mercedes was ready at the shop, but Emily did something that surprised even herself. She decided to donate it to a program training young mechanics. Now her daily taxi rides had become moments of discovery and connection. In her apartment, Emily prepared for the next day's meeting with Sheikh Abdullah. But this time there was no anxiety or need to impress. There was only gratitude and the certainty that she was finally on the right path. Her phone rang. It was a message from the Sheikh. "Tomorrow don't come by taxi. I'll make a point of picking you up myself." Emily laughed, feeling a wave of affection and respect for the man who, with his wise lesson, had changed not only her life, but the lives of so many people around her. From her balcony, she observed, the city that never slept. Each light, each illuminated window now told a different story. They were no longer just numbers on a spreadsheet. They were lives, dreams, possibilities. And for the first time in her professional life, Emily didn't need reports or graphs to know she was doing the right thing. She could see it in the smiles in the stories, in the renewed energy that pulsed in every corner of her company. The morning dawned clear and promising in New York City. Emily woke up before the alarm, feeling a serenity she had never experienced before an important meeting. She watched the sunrise from her balcony, mentally reviewing not numbers or strategies, but the faces and stories that had marked her journey of transformation. Promptly at 8 a.m., the building's reception called, "Ms. Emily, Sheikh Abdullah is here to pick you up." When she reached the ground floor, Emily couldn't contain a smile when she saw the Sheikh. impeccably dressed in an elegant suit, at the wheel of a taxi. "I thought it appropriate that our journey should end as it began," he said, opening the passenger door for her. During the trip, they talked like old friends. There was no longer the arrogant executive on one side and the wise mentor on the other, just two people who shared a vision of more humane and meaningful business. "You know, Sheikh Abdullah," said Emily, observing the city through the window, "I always thought success meant having the highest position, the most expensive car, the power to make others bend to my will. How ironic to think that I needed to meet a billionaire disguised as a taxi driver to understand the true meaning of wealth." The sheikh smiled, his serene gaze reflected in the rearview mirror. "Sometimes, Emily, we need to lose something to gain everything. You haven't lost your success, you've redefined." When they arrived at the company, they were greeted by a scene that would have been unthinkable a few weeks before. Employees from all levels gathered in the lobby, not out of obligation or fear, but out of genuine care and respect. The presentation was different from any other Emily had ever given. Instead of endless slides with graphs and projections, she took the sheikh on a journey through the transformed company. In each department, the employees themselves presented the changes and their impacts. Kelly, the young intern, Cecilia's daughter, confidently presented the new corporate wellness program. Mr. Anthony, the security guard who once barely dared to look executives in the eye, shared how the work environment had become more welcoming. In the former executive cafe, now a vibrant living space, Patricia coordinated a video conference with Middle Eastern partners, demonstrating how cultural barriers were being broken down through the exchange program. "Impressive," commented the sheikh, observing the natural interaction between people from different hierarchical levels. "You haven't just implemented changes, Emily. You've created a movement." After the complete visit, they gathered in Emily's office, now with doors always open and a free access policy for any employee who needed to talk. "So, Sheikh Abdullah," Emily began, "I know you came to evaluate the investment." He gently interrupted her. "Actually, Emily, I came to do more than that. I came to propose a broader partnership. I want this humanized management model to be replicated in other companies in my group, and I want you to lead this transformation process." Emily felt her eyes water. "Me? But a few months ago I was exactly the type of leader who needed to be transformed." "And that's precisely why you're the ideal person," he smiled. "Who better to guide others on this journey than someone who has already traveled the path?" At that moment, Cecilia entered the room with coffee. Emily immediately stood up to help her with the tray, a gesture that was now natural to her. "See," said the sheikh, "some transformations are so profound that they become part of who we are." The rest of the day was dedicated to celebration, not just the confirmed investment or the new international partnership, but something bigger, proof that it's possible to do business in a different way, more humane and yet successful. At the end of the afternoon, the sheikh was preparing to leave when Emily stopped him. "I have one last request." "And what would that be?" "Let me take you to the airport, by taxi, of course." During the journey, now with Emily at the wheel of a taxi she had specially rented for the occasion, they talked about the future, not just about numbers and projects, but about the impact they could have on people's lives. "You know, Emily," said the sheikh before saying goodbye, "some would say you've lost your old tough CEO stance. I say you've gained something much more valuable: wisdom." Emily watched the sheikh's plane take off, feeling a deep gratitude. She returned home by taxi, now her preferred form of transportation, and during the way she talked with the driver about his dreams and aspirations, as had become her habit. In her apartment, contemplating the city that never slept, Emily reflected on her journey. The power she once sought through intimidation, she now found through respect and care for people. Her phone rang with one last message from the sheikh. "Always remember, true leadership is not about how many people are below you, but how many you can elevate with you." Emily smiled, keeping those words in her heart. Was her journey of transformation over? No, In fact, it was just beginning. And now she had the privilege of helping others discover their own path to more humane and meaningful leadership. The city continued its frantic pace outside, but now she saw it with different eyes. Each passing taxi carried a story, each building housed dreams, and in each person, regardless of their position or title, there was potential waiting to be